My name's Peter Walsh, and I'm the Manager of Student Advising and Learning Strategies at the Justice Institute. And I have probably the longest title at the JI. And in part I have a long title because I have many hats that I wear. The hat today that I'm wearing is academic support. So today I'm going to share with you all sorts of strategies to handle the huge amount of information that you are asked to learn in 8 months' time, and when the instructors say, yes, can I borrow your book for just a second, that you have to know every single thing in this book and the other book and everything we tell you. How are you going to handle that? That's what I'm going to help you with today, is to talk about the learning process and how you can manage this from a learner perspective. I'll also talk about exam prep, time management, stress and anxiety, and anything else that you want to talk about today. I am here to help you guys. So in the not too distant future, I'm going to start a list of things that you would like me to help you with, and strategies and tactics and things that I can help you with. So that's one of the hats, is academic success of students, all students at JI. I also have some other roles. I'm also an academic advisor, which means that if you have a question or you run into a problem and you don't know who to talk to about that, and it's not obviously your instructor or your regional training coordinator, it's probably me. So at the end of today, I'm going to make sure that you have an email address. You're welcome to contact me, even though I'm situated in New West. We can certainly set up an appointment by telephone if you run into any issues or have any questions. I'm here to support you guys. And that could range from everything from trying to understand some of the academic bureaucracy around here to if something happens in your personal life and it starts to impede your learning, you can come chat with me about that. My services are completely confidential. I sometimes call that the Vegas rules. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. When you tell me something, it stays in my office. It doesn't get anywhere else without your written consent, except in very unusual circumstances. But for the most part, anything you talk to me is not shared with your program area. So you can have an open and free and confidential conversation with me that's in a safe environment. Another hat I wear is disability services. So if you have a disability or you're wondering whether you have a learning issue or a learning problem, again, you can come and talk to me about that. I'll walk you through the process. I'm the Disability Services Coordinator for the Justice Institute. So if you have a documented disability and you need some accommodations, I'm your guy. If you're wondering about it, you can also talk to me and we can kind of talk it through and see whether testing or what other options you might have are. I also wear a whole bunch of other hats, but I'm not going to bore you with those ones. Those are the three main ones. Academic success of students, which also includes writing, by the way. So we've launched a writing support service just about 6 weeks ago. And we're going to go online in the near future, not the immediate near future, but probably by September, we're going to have an online writing clinic for those of you who are writing papers. And disability services and academic advising, which is pretty much everything else. So that's, again, me, what I do. Today's session is going to be very interactive. I really want to hear from you how I could be helpful. Your instructors are in the room and they're going to ask lots of questions too. And I also want to let you know that I do have some topics I want to talk about. I've mentioned some of them already. I'm going to talk about active learning. How do you manage the learning process? How do you deal with selection issues? Again, you've got a big, huge amount of information to put into your brains, and you need to be selective about which information you're going to put in and when. And so I'll talk a bit about that. Time management. The dreaded P word, procrastination. You'd think in this program there's no time to procrastinate, but there is, isn't there? That's the nature of procrastination. As the stress goes up, so does the procrastination. And so I'll talk a little bit about that and other things that might be getting in the way of your learning. It is an interactive session. I have kind of a script in my head, but you can ask questions at any time. You can put up your hand if you want. You can just shout it out, your question or your comment or concern. You don't even need to talk about yourself. If you don't want to talk about yourself, you can always ask questions on behalf of your friend. You are welcome to do so. You have my permission that if you put up your hand and I ignore you, you have my permission to get my attention by throwing a soft object at me. Soft object, right? Not a can of water, right? And give me a moment, because I'm going to use the whiteboard here, and so I'm going to show you some things. So don't wait until my back is turned like this, put up your hand, and then whip something at the back of my head. Give me a moment. If I see your hand, I might put you on pause, because I need to complete what's in my head, but I will give you an opportunity, because again, this session is for you guys. It's not for me to talk to you for an hour. It's me to help you. So you ask the questions, you're in charge of what gets covered. So let me begin. First of all, nobody's reaching for a can of anything. This is good. Is there any things in particular, I'm going to write them down on the board, that you would like me to talk about today in the hour that we have? Gotcha. And are you talking specifically about the multiple choice format?
Yeah, and just some of the wording of some of the questions and the type of questions that are asked.
Great. How many share that? Those multiple guess, multiple choice questions? Yeah. So definitely I'll talk about that. Sometimes multiple choice is an actual strategy about how, don't throw anything yet, I see you, about how you actually go through the exam. But it is also often about how you actually prepare for it. A lot of people think that multiple choice should be easy, that you should just be able to recognize the answer. But the problem is that your instructors have put a whole bunch of answers in there that all look good. And usually they tell you to select the best answer, which means all of them are correct, but there's one that's better than the other ones. So that's often a learning strategy issue. So I will definitely talk about that. Your hand was up.
Yeah, actually, as far as touching on preparation, like what are the resources you should really try and be accessing, like online textbook, what is the best one?
So what resources you should be using? That's a great question. You'll want to be, I see you. Just wait, don't throw anything at me yet. About being selective. So when I talk about selection, I'll talk about where you go and what you're going there for. Perfect. Yes?
My question was, give us some ideas of how to study if you're in a group, let's say 3-4 people, what's the best strategy as far as preparing if you're in a group setting?
How many of you in a group have like a study group, formal or informal, put together already? Awesome. That's great. You've probably then discovered that group study has pros and cons. Group dynamics is the big con. It's also the pro. But yes, I can certainly talk about that.
How to effectively prepare for practical hands-on.
Great. How many share that as an interest of the practical head-on? Yeah. How do you kind of translate the theoretical textbook information into a practical one? And I'll definitely have some strategies about that, because it's a different kind of learning, although the principles are the same. Great. What else? Right. So how many of you share that concern, trying to fit all this into your life? I'm sure, great. And I'm sure your instructors said 24/7, 8 months, be awake. No sleep for you. Were you told, say goodbye to your friends and family for the time that you're in the program? Yeah, so there are actually two issues in there. One is around how do you actually plan your time, which is like, what should I do tonight? But then there's also the issue of balance. And you are not a learning machine. If you do nothing but study, at some point your brain will implode. And it'll shut off. I sometimes call this the circuit breaker. Too much amperage, brain dead. Go watch TV. So yeah, you want to manage that balance. You have a life, you need another part of your life. Sometimes you actually need to use your time schedule to ensure that the other balance items get in, because the academics will take them over. Does that help? Great. I'm going to pick him because you...
Overall, dealing with stress,
You guys are stressed?
Not yet.
How many for stress? Awesome. Yep. I think I'm going to call that tactical selection. And the reason I might word it that way is because there is no actual answer. So the question was, what's the perfect, I'm going to exaggerate this a bit, just to, push it a bit a bit more than what you said. You know, what is the singular, capital T, the way to study for this program? And it's in a way a legit question. Unfortunately, though, there is no answer to it, because learning is always about your brain and what your brain knows and how your brain learns. It's really about you and your learning. So there is no capital T, the way to do it. It'll depend a lot on what your background is, what you know already, and what your own strengths are and what your own learning styles are, how you approach the material. So I'll definitely, let me add that one too there. I see your hand, by the way, learning styles. Talk a little bit about that in there. So it's really about how do you access the resources so that you know that you're learning as best as you can, and what that might look like for you, totally different than what it's going to look like for you and you and you. It's quite personal, and it's adjusted. So as you go through the program, particularly as you start to draw on the practical, there's a shift. You start to study differently. You start to learn differently. You start to prepare for your exams differently. There's a transformation there. Great. So how do you take 8,000 pages and condense them into the essentials? My answer is going to be to that is you're going to learn in layers, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Great. What else? So we've got how do you deal with multiple choice exams. We've got what resources and when to use them, how to study in a group effectively, how to prepare for practical exams and practical learning, how to set up a time schedule or plan, how to balance the rest of your life, how to deal with stress. So how many of you are in the situation where you have to unlearn stuff that you already know so that you can put new stuff in your brain? Okay, so unlearning. And that's so hard to do. Unlearning, there's an N in there. Actually, I don't think I should have apologized up front about my handwriting. I blame my father. He's a physician. It's genetic. If at any time you want to know what I've written up here, you can just ask, and I may be able to read it. Yeah, how do you kind of handle unlearning? And even as you go through your learning, you might experience that as you're learning a new section, it's like the stuff that you studied last week starts to kind of fade away. And so often you have to be conscious about relearning what you already know as you're putting new information in your brain. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but when you put new information into your brain, it's like something that you already know pops out the back. And so you have to reinsert it. And part of that in the unlearning is you need to actually, in a sense, overwrite the wrong way to do it with the new way. And that often takes more energy and more effort than to just learn it from the start. So it's a legitimate question. Great. That's a good list. I noticed that procrastination's not on there. Should I add procrastination? Why? Maybe later. Maybe later we should add it. All right. Anything else? It's not your only opportunity. As I said, as we go through today, you are welcome to add to this list and ask any questions, make any comments, or talk about your friend. All right. So let me first start with describing a very typical learning experience for students and see if you can relate to this. And I'm going to draw this out as a chart. So here's time, and here is concentration, attention, and learning. Kind of makes sense that if you're not attending to the page, you're not learning anything from it. So you start off with a lot of concentration, and I'm going to pick as this was a textbook, but it could also be a lecture. So here's page 1, paragraph 1, sentence 1, word 1, and you're going to read at the beginning of that chapter, chapter 1, and you're going to read in a straight line. How many of you have done that? Opened up to the book, started at the beginning, read it. Right. And so what you've probably experienced, and again, I'm going to exaggerate this a bit. Oh, good. We have one that's a little...
Full colors.
Now, what she doesn't know is I'm actually partially colorblind. So I joke with people, I see 3 colors: red, blurple, it's a combination of blue and purple, and breen, which is a combination of brown and green. So I'm going to take this yellow pen. No, I'm kidding. So you start on paragraph 1, page 1, sentence 1, word 1, and you begin to read in a straight line. And for a while, concentration's pretty good. And then this starts to happen. How many can identify with that? Yeah. And then that's happened. How many of you identify with that? Great. And what happens when you hit here? Yeah, and after you've got the coffee? Oh, you go to page 3. Most people go right back to the beginning. Paragraph 1, sentence 1, word 1, and they try again. And sometimes they get a little farther before this. And then they come back and they go right back to the beginning. So they're now rereading that section of the chapter twice. And at some point it just kind of looks like this. And I'm going to exaggerate this a bit. This is where you end up. I just really can't draw a modern flat screen TV, so how many of you have experienced this? This is the version of the coffee, yeah. So what do you think happens here? Why does this happen for you or your friend?
The text is not engaging.
Right, it's boring. Text is boring. How many of you find that textbook is just totally the most exciting read? It's such a page turner. There's a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter that just makes you want to go on to the next chapter. No, it's a very academic book. It's meant to convey a lot of information really quickly and easily, and not to entertain as it goes along. So yes, so it's not particularly engaging. What else? And so there's some expectations there. You were expecting something and it didn't show up and something else showed up instead. And the other stuff is boring and doesn't seem connected. Great, there was another hand over here.
Complex vocabulary.
Right. Yeah. So the comment about it's like you're learning Latin, well, actually you are. All of those medical terms come from Latin and Greek. So you are indeed learning Latin as you study. You didn't know that. You're not going to get a Latin degree out of this, but you will know a lot of Latin root words at the end. So there's 2 parts of this. One is the vocabulary, and I can talk a little bit about the vocabulary piece a little later on. But there's also really detailed paragraphs in there where there's like 5 bold-faced words all in one paragraph. And they're all connected in some way, and you've got to figure out what does that mean. And it really slows down the reading because now you have to process that paragraph in great detail. Whereas the paragraph before, there was almost nothing in it that looked important, and you skimmed right through it. Great. Anything else about why you lose concentration and attention? Yeah. So the question is, you tune out quicker when you go back and you start at the beginning and go over. Let me ask this question. How many of you as a kid, you can do it as an adult as well, said a common word like table, and they said it out loud to themselves over and over and over again? Table, 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 table. How many of you have done that? What happens after the 100th speaking of table? It starts to sound weird, yeah. Because what you're actually doing when you're doing that repetition is you're meditating. And according to certain traditions, if you do it long enough, you'll attain enlightenment. And that's great, but as you do it, that word becomes more and more foreign. It becomes more and more weird. It becomes less known to you. So if you keep rereading the paragraph over and over again, it is not a surprise to find out that you understand less of it the second time. and even less of it the third time. And then there's a part of your brain that goes, oh man, something's really wrong here. I've read this 3 times and now I don't even know what I'm reading. I better read it a 4th time, and now your anxiety's up. And as you probably know, high anxiety is a learning impairing condition. And so when you try to read it the 4th time, not only is it boring and you've been meditating, you're now highly anxious, and so you can't read it. And then there's another part of you that goes, oh, I'm in real serious trouble now. How many of you had that experience? Yeah. So the solution is stop rereading. And somebody suggested this, go on to page 3, and quite often that's a good idea when you get that aspect of it. But I'm going to have a better solution in a moment. Anything else? Why attention and concentration fades? Okay, I'm going to give you the one that you haven't mentioned. That. Yeah, absolutely. So there's stuff going on in your environment. You might get distracted. The TV, if it sits right in front of your study space with the remote right there, tempting you, calling you, you're going to be easily distracted. If you live with other people, if you're in a family and you've got young kids, stuff's they're gonna intrude. Sometimes your best friend. This is leaping ahead to procrastination, but usually procrastinators choose particular things to procrastinate on. So if you're procrastinating, there are the cleaners. When they're avoiding the work, they're cleaning. Right? And then there's the socializer. When they want to procrastinate, they pick up a phone. If you're a socializing procrastinator and that procrastinator knows it, they're going to call you to help them procrastinate. So they will intrude. So that can happen as well. But yes, stuff comes up. You have a limited bandwidth. Sometimes what you need to do, and this isn't on the list, but you need to protect your brain. You need to put a fence around it or a screen around it so that you don't get those distractions that come from outside coming in. That can be finding a different study space. It could be going to the Tim Hortons and studying there for a while. It could be closing the door. It could be making an agreement with your roommates. Don't bother me. Hang up the sign. It could be putting earplugs in. Wax earplugs, or listening to music, or doing all sorts of other things that help screen out or protect your brain from those distractions. And sometimes there's nothing much you can do about it, and you just need to deal with it and come back.
Is listening to music detrimental to studying, or can it help?
Great. So the question is listening to music detrimental to studying, or can it help? Yes and no. How many of you, first of all, find that listening to music or noise helps you focus and concentrate while you're reading? Great. About half the room. How many prefer complete silence? Great. Anyone discovered that sometimes it's the transition from one to the other that helps? So that if you're listening to music, you start to get irritated with it, so you turn it off, you go to silence? A couple of hands. Yeah. It's a personal thing. What I would say that if you're going to listen to music, what you don't want to do is listen to the radio. Because if you're listening to the radio, the commercials are designed psychologically to capture your attention because they want to sell you something. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want that distraction coming in. And so if you're playing your own music, don't play your favorite music that you haven't heard for a while, because you'll want to pay attention to the music, and that'll pull you out of the text. So have a study CD that's on ultimate, infinite, repeat. What is it? It could be anything. It doesn't really matter. Lots of students who need a little bit of background noise find that it doesn't matter where they are, as long as there's some background noise, they're okay. They can study in a cafeteria. Other people could never study in a cafeteria. But it has to be a full cafeteria with a constant hubbub of noise. If it's an empty cafeteria and somebody walks by in heavy shoes, their attention is pulled away. So it's the noise that helps. And quite often, changing the noise or changing the environment extends attention. You've been doing fine, and then you start to lose focus, change something up. Turn off the music. If it's silent, turn on some music, or do something like that. People, again, they want to know, well, what does the research say? Don't go by research. I've read all sorts of silly research. Here's one. If you have a to-do list, some study researched whether it was more motivating to cross an item off your to-do list when you complete it, or to put a check mark beside it? Any guesses as to which one's better? It's actually putting the check mark. Is that really going to make a difference for you as a student? Like, here is the solution to being a straight A+ student. No. I have read so many studies. Like the yellow highlighter. How many of you use a highlighter? Great. So there's all sorts of studies about yellow versus green and things like that, all funded by, guess what? The highlighter company. And what really matters is not what color the highlighter is, it's what you're doing with it. And I'll actually talk about that very soon, about the effective use of highlighter, because many of you have experienced what I call highlighter hypnosis. Yeah, you highlight the whole page. So, here's the page. Say this is a page here, right? And you take your highlighter, and you look at it, and you see a bold-faced word. So you highlight the bold-faced word. Doesn't matter that it's already bold-faced. Highlight it anyway. And then you go along, and there's an italicized word, so you highlight that. Oh, and then you notice that there's something between the bold-faced and the italicized word that connects it. Better highlight that. Oh, geez, now that I think about it, yeah, it's all important. How many of you have over-highlighted? I had one instructor say if he wrote a textbook, he would pre-print it on yellow paper because that's what the students are doing with it anyway. They were painting their textbook yellow. This is not effective because it's not active, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But it's not the color that you use, it's what you do with it. And if you use it this way, you end up wasting your time because it's not useful to you. And if you go back to something you've highlighted 3 weeks ago and you look at it and it doesn't make sense to you, you wasted your time in a way, because it should make sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, throw out the highlighter. Better yet, use a pen, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So, caution about tips. Things like use a yellow highlighter. When in doubt on a multiple choice exam, pick what? C. Instructors know this already and know D is not the new C. They're very careful about how they plan their tests, right? So just ignore all the tips. Go by what you know works for you. The proof is in the pudding. If learning is happening, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. If it's not, change it up. Try something new.